grateful to have.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Glencora. It's been an absolute pleasure planning this together with you. Also, thank you, Henry, for your tech support. It's been an incredible journey the last 5 or 6 weeks that I've been experiencing throughout this crisis in Afghanistan. I thank everybody here for your time. I was looking through the chat. I saw that we have some amazing mental health providers and other service providers from the state of Virginia. I'm very proud of the relationship that I have with the Virginia Refugee Healing Partnership and other entities, along with my mentor, Dr. Eva Stitt. My name is Freshta Taeb, and I am a senior refugee interventionist for Cornerstone Family and Marriage Intervention. It's getting harder and harder for words to connect as we've all been kind of on burnout mode. I think we're getting very close to that, where most Afghan Americans and other service providers on and off the base have been pulling 20 to 21 hours a day. So I ask for your patience and also your forgiveness if there's anything that gets a little in and out of order, or things are not as connected. I'm not my usual self. So we'll try hard to get as much information to you today as possible. And I always, in these trainings and workshops, learn more from you, believe me, than you probably learned from me. So part of what I do at Cornerstone is that, and this is previous to this experience, is that I have 80% of my clientele that are Afghan refugees that speak Dari and Pashto. And I am consistently dealing with issues such as PTSD, anger management, marital discourse, and one of my specializations is in domestic violence. Another thing that we do at Cornerstone is that I oversee and lead workshops with regards to parenting in the West. Also, anger management. We do have a very good program that deals with both children, adolescents, and adults, how to express emotions and feelings. I am also the managing director of FT Translation Services, which is why you probably see me on the BHIT, Behavioral Health Interpretation Trainings. I'm a level 3 trainer. I teach resettlement agency staff and behavioral health interpreters how to interpret efficiently and effectively. I am the clinician on that team that makes sure, and right now, as you can imagine, more than ever, it's so incredibly important to have trained and qualified interpreters, because language access, as we all know, is one of the top issues when it comes to receiving mental health services in the state of Virginia and other states, essentially, especially not only with the Afghan refugee population, but with all populations across the board. We find that language disparity is one of the biggest barriers when it comes to dealing with some of these issues. So that's just a little bit of a brief overview on what I do for a living. And essentially, the other element of that would be like, why do you do this, right? So my parents are both from Afghanistan. I was born and raised here. My father came before pre-war. So he came in the technocrat era. He was a hippie. He just wanted a better life. So he came out here. But my mother actually came here right after the Soviet invasion in 1979. And she was actually a political asylee. So the interesting part about that, my life, is that I've had firsthand experience living in a household in which I've had to watch, in a beautiful way, my parents going through so many barriers and hurdles to create a good life for themselves and their children. And that's why I'm standing here in front of you today. And throughout that journey, there has been so many elements that have affected me on a personal and professional level. So anything that I, at a personal capacity, can do to help alleviate some of those hurdles in this process is really my number one goal. All right. So before we begin the actual workshop and talking about mental health services and some of the disparities and our topic today, it's really important to understand the different immigration statuses of the folks that are here from Afghanistan, right? So we have three different layers in this, right? Traditionally, in the last 20 years, we've noticed that the population of Afghans that have been coming through what's called an SIV, or a special immigrant visa. This visa is only issued to two countries in the world. One is Afghanistan and the other one is Iraq. And the reason why these two particular countries have been chosen to receive that particular visa is because the United States has special contracts with them, and they are we're standing shoulder by shoulder translating and interpreting information for the United States, right? So it's almost like you helped us out, now we're going to help you out. And if you understand the culture and the dynamic in Afghanistan, you will understand that people that are translators and interpreters are very, very high risk individuals. They are targeted by terrorist groups and by organizations such as the Taliban, right? I do not recognize that as a regime. I refer to it as an organization. So that is one status, right? And that's a more traditional status that we're used to. SIVs normally receive resettlement benefits. They go into one of these large resettlement agencies, either the International Rescue Committee, Lutheran Social Services, right? ECDC, Catholic Charities. These are the agencies that work with the refugee population and getting them resettled. Now, the unique challenge that we have today is that a vast majority of Afghans that came during this crisis do not fall under the category of special immigrant visa recipients. They fall under a very unique category called humanitarian parole. I have to be very honest with you. I don't like this word. When you hear the word parole or you hear the word parolee from a mental health perspective, it is a criminalization of a people, and it is a word that is associated with somebody who's done something wrong. I have to clarify and make it very clear that a parolee in an immigration sense is not somebody who has committed a crime. Instead, a parolee is somebody who has come in a legal manner to the United States because their country was in a crisis. But when they come to the United States, they're in what we call a waiting period, in which they do not have a status. So they essentially work backwards. Normally, you get a visa in hand, you come to the United States, then you have A, B, or C status. As a parolee, you come here legally and you wait to receive a status. That could be you can apply for political asylum. That's one of the ways in which you can stay in this country, or you can apply for an actual different visa, right? And this is specifically for people who are in emergency, crisis, and high risk country, which is Afghanistan at the moment, right? So important to know and understand that these folks did not commit a crime. So please do understand that. And their situation is very unique. The challenge with parolees in the past and now what we're dealing with is that parolees by law, because they're waiting for a status, they do not qualify for traditional benefits, right? So SIVs will receive benefits, and I'll get into that when we talk about resettlement. But parolees traditionally do not receive those benefits, right? So as a parolee, you are allowed to apply for work authorization so that you're allowed to get a job and work. That you're allowed to do, right? But in the interim and during that waiting period, you're not allowed to work and you're not allowed to receive benefits. So that's a very, very thin, gray, very difficult line, right, that we're going to be facing with the Afghan population in particular. So again, I just wanted to emphasize that one of the challenges is going to be with this particular population. right? So how does resettlement work? And you'll have to excuse my very poorly put together slides due to my technology and graphics and stuff. Hopefully I can get somebody on board that can be more fancy. I'm not a very fancy person. I really use my slides as talking points. So it's really important to understand that when individuals come into this country, they go through a very thorough process, right? And we're all pretty much familiar with that process. The thing that differentiates this population from other populations that we've served in the past is during the President Trump's era, the quota and the number of refugees that were coming in was so low that we had a fairly easy time resettling folks, right? They would come in traditionally, they would be assigned to a certain state depending on the community, right? When we resettle, we try to resettle people, A, where there's housing, but B, really in a community in which they're familiar and in a community in which they can really assimilate well and have that support that they need. And we're going to be talking about that support very shortly, right? Right now, things are so untraditional and unconventional. We actually have folks in military bases, right? Which, from a mental health perspective, can be extremely intimidating, can be extremely triggering. Even seeing people walking around, even though these folks are such amazing and merciful and sweet and kind, from a mental health perspective, people who have experienced war and who've gone through war are watching people walking around with in uniform. That could be really triggering depending on what experience they've gone through, right? So important to note and important to understand that the entire dynamic is very unique. This has never happened before, right? So we're all trying to navigate through this. I want you to also think about numbers, right? Fort Dix, where I'm at right now, we're looking at about close to 10,000, expecting another 5,000 the next couple of weeks. That's 15,000 people. Wisconsin, Fort McCoy, we've got about 13,500 approximately, give or take. We're getting close to 15,000 there, right? So if you could picture, you have a large amount of people who on their way here and on their journey lost paperwork, right? They could have been an SIV recipient, but when they were getting on the plane, they lost their visa. They lost their passport. They lost their contracts, right? Things were shuffled around. They were separated from their families, right? So that's the answer to the question of why is this taking so long? Why is it that people have been in these bases for 5 weeks? This is the reason why. There's an entire picture that people don't see. And the difficulty with transparency and visibility on a military base is because of the security, right? Public affairs, they have a Department of Public Affairs. I can tell you on my fingers how many times media has been allowed to get on the base. Very, very limited access. You're not allowed to videotape. You're not allowed to take photos, right? You're not allowed to really share a lot of what's happening, but that's only for the safety and security of the actual refugees, not because people are trying to hide things, right? So important to understand in the federal processing, there's immigration processing, right? So every family is actually being interviewed one by one. Why, how did you come here? What is your status? If there is no status and things are lost, they're going to go into that parolee pool. But really, there's a lot of people who are here on different types of visas and different types of statuses. So that's important to understand. Along with the federal processing comes health screenings, right? Step number 2, we got to get people health screened. We got to get them COVID tested. We got to get them immunizations going, right? Measles, mumps, rubella, there was a measles outbreak. There was a 21-day pause on every single base. Guess what? That slowed things down. It was essential and it had to happen in order to control the spread. But also in the same token, this entire process was then paused for 21 days, right? So it's important to know and understand. And if you speak to or have communications with people on the base, please urge people do not leave, be processed so that you don't have problems later on, right? We're asking folks to encourage that. Once these folks are processed on a federal level, then folks are moved down to a state level. And that's when our work, I say our because I know every single person on this call is pretty much on this local and state level, right? Then these folks will be, hopefully, if the right pieces of legislation are passed, hopefully we can get parolees in the same category as SIVs benefit wise. Hopefully we can get some funding and say, you know what, that 90 days that you're going to get rental assistance is going to be the same for parolees. So another thing that I'm working on from the advocacy level, I'm a board member of the Afghan American Foundation. And what we do and a lot of the work that we're involved in is policy advocacy, right? Trying to speak to people in Senate and Congress, in federal and state, and trying to secure funding so that these folks, the majority of the folks that came, will also get help. 2014, I was a program director of a DV agency in northern New Jersey that dealt directly with the needs of Syrian refugees. There was a lot of mistakes that were made. Our goal this time around is that we learn from those mistakes and we don't repeat them, right? We were placing people in homes that children had such high levels of lead poisoning that they were being hospitalized. We were putting people in neighborhoods that the socioeconomic status was low, so that the areas were low income, meaning that they were able to afford things. But the problems that came from that were a lot of, we had individuals that were staying in homes that were infested with bed bugs, prostitution, drugs. So we're trying to see if we can prevent as much of that as possible. We're trying to resettle people in homes and in neighborhoods that are more comfortable and acceptable to people who have families, and so that people can live healthy lives. There's been a lot of trauma that's occurred. We don't want to re-traumatize people. And that's honestly what was happening with that particular population. So once these folks are put into these resettlement agencies, there are different buckets, right, that are dealt with. There's the housing bucket, right? Let's get people housed. And once they're housed, they get about 90 days, which is equivalent to 3 months of rental assistance, right? And they will also be eligible for SNAP benefits. SNAP is the food benefits, right? They will be put into ESL programs. In order to receive those benefits, they must mandatory go to these ESL classes. They will be provided with job training, right? So most of these resettlement agencies have an employment department that works in conjunction with either Department of Labor or even local businesses, right? I know in my Elizabeth office, we have a close relationship with the Jersey Gardens Mall. So what do? We when I visit my clients, we use IRC space. Thank you, IRC, for giving us a room to use to see our clients. And we have these conversations, and I see that, Ms. Freshta, next week, I have an interview in a store in the mall, and I'm so excited, right? The most important part of this, in my opinion, right now, is cultural orientation, right? There's cultural competency that we need to understand these folks, and we need to understand what it means to be an Afghan, American. As an Afghan American, for me, it's important for people to understand my Afghan culture, but also it's important for my Afghan guests that are on the base to understand our culture. We need to orientate these folks, teach them about transportation laws, child protective service laws. We need to teach them about how schools run in this country. So really, really important. There's an individual who also sits on the Afghan American Foundation board. His name is Mustafa Balbak. He wrote a 76-page report. He went from Maine all the way to California, interviewing folks, Afghan American folks, on their jobs, where they live. And he curated this amazing research project that I want to share some things with you. And I've extracted that from his report. The SIV population, because I know that some of your questions when I was reading the overview was to address some of where these folks live. If you take a look at California, we have the largest population of Afghans in California with 20,000 SIVs. Due to the large Afghan American community, they provide the highest benefits, okay? And also you can get some lucrative incomes there once you are trained and ready to go. California is followed by Virginia. That's you guys, right? Us folks. Texas, Virginia, New York is another big one. And we see that North Carolina is up and coming. Also, people go to California because California has largest Afghan American population. Why? Because the terrain and climate is also closest to what we feel in Afghanistan, right? So I wanted to transition into mental health and behavioral health, and kind of read this quote to you. It really, really resonated with me when I read it, and it really made me feel a little understood and heard during this time, right? The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and do not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet, right? So it's really, really hard for us as service providers, especially as Afghan American community members. Please do reach out to your Afghan American service providers. Not to say that our pain is more or less, because I do realize and appreciate that most people on the base are not Afghan American, but really this is a re-traumatization for those of us who have come over as refugees at age 4 or 5. This is a re-traumatization of those events. This is watching our people go through what we've gone through is not an easy task, right? I don't have to tell you guys what trauma is, since we're all in this line of business, right? But it is important to know that the direct trauma that these folks have experienced and the direct exposure that they've actually had, excuse me for the triggering and for the secondary trauma I may be I may be projecting onto you, or I may be transferring onto you. The other day I was at the base, and an individual, they have locals that are volunteering there, right? Afghan locals that are in some of these positions, and they're volunteering. And one was volunteering in the cafeteria. We had an event, and I was literally just going in it to grab a drink. And he stopped me, and he pulled out his phone, and he started to show me family members that were dismembered. Okay. And I was going there expecting to grab a bottle of water. And on my way back, these folks want to be seen and these folks want to be heard. The exposure that they've had to this type of trauma, the firsthand experience that they have, and now they're here in the United States, and now they're suffering to top off PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder, which is really a very normal reaction to an abnormal event, right? They have this PTSD, they've brought over their PTSD, and now they're suffering from survivor's guilt. I got out, but my wife didn't. My children didn't, right? I can tell you another story, because I know that Glencora was telling me that she would like to hear some real life experiences and real life stories. And it's important to see that perspective when we talk about this particular situation. There was another individual, he came up to me, and we were just talking, casual conversation about children. And I shared with him that I have 2 beautiful children and their ages and stuff like that, and what they were doing. And he kind of froze, and he kind of got distant. And I said, "You all right?" And he said, "My 12-year-old son has been missing for 3.5 years. They killed my father, and my son was with him. And we just don't know if he's alive or he's not." So I looked at him, and we sat down. We sat down on the curb of the area. We were outside. And I sat with him, and he cried. And so did I. I told him that I had a 12-year-old, and I can't even imagine 1 minute without her. And we sat down and we cried together. And after showing that, empathy, he told me, and I said, "Okay, so how is your wife doing? Can I see her? Can I speak to her? I'd like to counsel her." He said to me, "My wife didn't want to leave." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "She's still waiting for him." Right? So let that resonate for a moment. Let that resonate. So this man, he came by himself. He left, but his wife and his daughter as well had the same stance. She didn't want to leave until she found her brother. Right? And his wife said, "I will not leave this country until I find my child." That's one story. In 7 minutes, between the time it took me to go grab that bottle of water from the cafeteria to come back and sit down on the curb to actually have a sip of it, these were 2 stories that were shared with me in that very, very short increment of time. So it's important to know and understand that you guys that are going to be dealing with this type of trauma, it's important to understand that I can be very honest and very transparent with you that I would say for the first 30 days, I was heavily experiencing secondary trauma. It took me 30 days to really speak to a lot of supportive people. My boss, which both of my bosses, Dr. Eva Stitt and Dr. Susie Ismail, who have been my anchors, speak to them about these experiences and really be able to overcome that. And I think at about 30 days in, something happened to me and I was like, okay, I've spoken about this. I've dealt with my own trauma. Now I'm ready to take care of other people, right? It's important to recognize that and walk away if you need to walk away. If these things are, the secondary trauma is affecting you on a daily basis and you are unable to function when you go home with your family and your loved ones, that is very, very important to address and even more important to really acknowledge and know that this is something that's going to affect you and something that you definitely need to take care of before it gets worse. Because honestly, you can't help other people, right? You can't give from an empty cup. So I did come to that point. I think it was, I had some really good friends sit me down and say, you're not yourself and you're saying some things that are not like you. So I took I took a couple of days and I really took care of what I need to take care of. And now I'm ready to roll. But once you get to that point, it's really, really important to know that it has to be addressed. And it's important to be part of a team that's going to help you get through that, right? So I'm going to show you a very short video. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can make sure that I can try to get this video up and running for you. And okay. Of course, when I need the video, it's not here, but I will try one more time. Okay. Nope, did not work. Try one more time. Sorry, folks. I promise we did a test run. And do you guys see the video? Glencore, do you see the video?
Yep, we've got it.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, great. Do you hear it?
The stress associated with this kind of work is quite unique in the sense that workers are required to listen to traumatic and often horrific stories on an ongoing and consistent basis, which requires them to have a high level of understanding, compassion, and empathy. Now, while helping clients to get through these experiences can often be rewarding and satisfying, it also exposes us to the emotions and the feelings of our clients, which can ultimately transfer and have negative effects on us as well. Long term, this can emerge in forms of vicarious trauma and often require workers to seek professional advice or intervention.
Working with human suffering and sitting with women and listening to their story and what they've suffered is very challenging and can be sometimes overwhelming and can have an impact or sort of permeate in other aspects of your life. What's really important is to be very mindful of when it is starting to get a bit overwhelming and a bit too much, and in order to allow yourself to take the right steps to look after yourself. But it's also listening to that at the beginning of when it starts to feel a bit overwhelming, so that it doesn't get to the point where you feel like you are going to burn out.
Ultimately, we can break down vicarious trauma into four divisions or categories of symptoms, and these can be emotional, cognitive, physical, and behavioural. So with the emotional symptoms, we often see workers starting to experience feelings of emotional numbness, emotional overwhelmness. The cognitive symptoms may present as thoughts of why is the world like this, and rather cynical views about the people and the world that we live in. The physical symptoms can include intrusive reactions. So we start to experience intrusive imagery, intrusive thoughts, and ultimately nightmares and flashbacks. And finally, we have the behavioural symptoms. So we start to experience withdrawal from social, occupational, and personal relationships. We also start to see people withdraw from activities that they once gained a lot of pleasure from. And rather, we start to see maladaptive behaviours creep in, such as people consuming more alcohol, maybe resorting to substance use, and often declines in their diet as well.
Some of the things that you can do to address vicarious trauma is to be able to recognize that yourself, but it is also very important and helpful to be in a workplace that promotes self-care. Some of the things that you can do for yourself on a daily basis, taking time out to eat well, exercise, and engage with the people that are in your life, and things that you might enjoy doing for yourself.
All right, so I stopped the video there because self-care is key to anything you do in your life. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can absolutely not take care of anyone else. So important to know and recognize, and just really, really, really kind of understand that self-recognition is the most important thing in awareness, right? So once you're there, then sky's the limit. All right, so when we do this intervention work and when we're dealing with the refugee population, we do use Hofstede's and Hall's value dimensions, right? We do talk about these different concepts, which is really important to know and understand. For the first one, remember that individualism versus collectivism, right? So remember that the refugees, especially from Afghanistan, come from a collective country, right? Collectivism is the way that they've learned to live. So when they come here and, they're told that, all right, folks, you, it's all about you, what you want, you and your nuclear family. There's a husband, there's a wife, there's a child, right? This is not how things work in Afghanistan. Collective societies and a lot of other societies, not only Afghanistan, that are collective. And, extended families, everybody makes the decision. There's a neighborhood elder. So really remembering that when refugees come here and during their 1 to 3 year refugee curve, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that refugee curve where like in the beginning, there's excitement, right? And then there's and then slowly but surely it goes down, it declines into reality setting in, the realities, and then you go into survival mode, right? So you're so excited that you're going to have this new life, and then you have all these expectations, and then when you realize that those expectations are so difficult to meet, that's when that curve starts to decline, right? So important to know and understand that this particular population is from a collective society, and until that 1 or 3 year period of assimilation passes, it's going to be very, very difficult. People will feel isolated. They will feel alone. They will feel, they don't have their aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters, right? Whoever was able to get on those planes got on those planes. There were so many separation, and a whole other topic that we're dealing with, right, are minors that have been separated from parents, right? And it's a very, very sad and very difficult. And I anticipate that once we start these counseling services and once we start to talk to these people, that is going to play a very huge role. So important to really understand the dynamic of separation and what that entails, okay? High and low context, remember that when we talk about Afghanistan, we're talking about a high context society, right? We're talking about Not too much is said, more things are understood by nonverbal cues, right? We're not going to say so many things and words and explain so many things, but we might show it by the way that we move. United States, Canada, Western Europe is more low context, right? We love to explain, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm looking at my time and I'm like, oh my goodness, I only have such a limited amount of time. So it's so important to say like, time, right? Like we want to explain everything. We want to describe everything. I want to tell you something in 150 words. Somebody from a higher context culture does not want to spend that many words, right? They're going to be, it's a different approach. So again, for refugees to shift from high context to low context is hard. So when you're dealing with this population, remember that your interactions and your rapport are going to be different. It's going to be in the beginning like pulling teeth. I remember the first client that I ever saw. When I was finished, I said, whoa, that was hard. And my supervisor was like, why was it hard? I said, I felt like I was pulling teeth. And then she sat down and we had a really good conversation. She reminded me of the context and she said, the body language in the beginning and until these people get assimilated is going to be more important than even what they're saying, right? So pay attention to that. A lot of nonverbal cueing, masculinity versus femininity. Obviously, this is a patriarchal society. So yes, we have educated women. Yes, we have women that are do amazing things in Afghanistan, but there is a dynamic, right? There are different gender nuances that we have to get used to and understand. Polychronic versus monochronic. Well, folks, if you know people from including my own family, the concept of time is very, very different. You got to make sure that you understand and make folks understand that when something is, you have an appointment to see your caseworker at 10:15, they mean 10:15. Not I show up at 12 and I'm still on time, right? So it's important to understand that the concept of time, it's a teaching, it's an area of opportunity, and it's a difference of culture, right? So showing up at a wedding at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. is not that big of a deal for an Afghan, right? But if you're invited at 7, an American will be there at 6:55, right? So there's a different concept, and it's important to know and understand that, right? Moving through the levels, right? These are going to be the key elements that are going to help us push refugees forward or push people that are displaced. I know that refugee is not the only category that we're using for Afghans, but for the lack of time, I'm going to use that term. It's really, really important to know and understand that these are the levels that we have to. There's an intrapersonal level, right? But then there's also an interpersonal level, right? Family is the lack thereof of family and the family that is here. This is going to be a tricky part to really navigate through, right? How are we going to live here without our extended families? How are we going to make it through these challenges? How am I going to get from point A to point B, right? We need a lot of group support. After Ida, unfortunately, I have to report that my clients, my Afghan and Syrian clients that I had, so terrible and so sad, but they've been here for 3 to 5 years, right? So just about restart, kind of at that point where they're on their own, they've got their homes, they're happier, they understand more, they've got jobs. Ida hits, and guess where Ida hits? Ida hits in the heart, literally in one resettled refugee neighborhood. So we were holding support groups to top everything else off with the crisis on the base. We were holding these support groups for teenagers that were displaced, high school students that were displaced during the storm. So now I have all my clients staying in hotels. And this is a week before school started. So they're being transported from the northern part of town to the central part of town. And when the sirens and the ambulance and the authorities came to evacuate them, this brought them back to Afghanistan. The PTSD came back. So having support groups is so important, both for people who suffered from Ida, but not only that, but also for these people who are going to be, we're going to need support groups when people come off bases. We're going to need to talk about some of those experiences, standing on long lines for food, right? We're trying our best, but there's still still feeding 10,000 people, standing on long lines to get clothing, right? These are very, very traumatic experiences. So support groups will be essential. I encourage all of your organizations to get groups up and started for children, right? Children is going to be play therapy. You want to get some toys, really good toys that we can get them playing with those toys, drawing out their feelings. I know that on the base, I think it's Catholic Charities, they have some play therapy going, and I saw some drawings, drawings that are going up. And one of the individuals that's not a mental health provider came up to me and showed me a drawing, and it was like this big gun, right? All the kids, some kids are sitting there drawing flowers, and some kids are drawing guns. Some kids are drawing blood. And as mental health professionals, we know what that through art is where we discover children, what children are suffering through and what they're going through. Their brains are not fully developed and they're not expressive verbally, but they are able to express some of these emotions on paper. Some of those drawings were very disturbing, right? So I know for a fact that children will require play therapy. I know for a fact that adolescents will need teen group support groups. I know that adults, women separately from men, we want to remember that men and women should be separated when it comes to these groups, because women feel more comfortable speaking their mind and heart. They don't need to be in front of men. They need to be with each other, because a woman's struggle is going to be very, very different, right, going into this than a man's will. And we have women that are, and I saved this for a later slide, but I'm gonna throw it in now. We have women that are suffering from miscarriages on the base from the trauma, the 5 or 6 day journey. They weren't able to keep their babies. They miscarried. We have stillborns. Okay. We have, all sorts of very specific women issues, right? So we need women to deal with women issues in this particular population. A woman is not going to open up to a male mental health professional when it comes to these very, very traumatic experiences. They're not, because the culture doesn't work that way. People are segregated based on gender. So important to understand that to have as much female staff or females as possible, right? And then of course there's organizational support. Besides the resettlement agencies, we want to make sure that we are very, very much in touch with the masajid, right? Or masajid is the plural for masjid, right? These mosques and these areas of worship are going to be very key to getting people together and giving them spiritual relief. People seek comfort through God if they believe in God. And this population, I can tell you, because we have these mosques and tents that we've created on base, that's where they go to seek solace. That's where they go to feel better about what's going on. So it's important to include the spiritual element. We do not shy away from speaking about religion and speaking about faith and speaking about things that comfort this population. Barriers that are overcome by building resilience, right? So these are the steps we at Cornerstone, we kind of look at these things. And we, for refugees specifically, believe that these barriers will be overcome through the following. Education, of course, is going to be the number one key. Understanding the way the country works. And of course, the children attending schools and learning as much things as they can to be wonderful citizens of this country. I can tell you a beautiful example. The head of this entire operations allies, a great friend and a great ally, Harris Tareen, right? He is an Afghan refugee, came to this country at the age of 5 as a refugee. But here he is, the chief advisor for the Department of Homeland Security right now. Anything is possible. So it's important to use people like that as role models and to remind people that, hey, I know you're struggling right now, but guess what? This isn't forever. This is temporary. There's a light at the end of this tunnel. So education is top. Then we came up with self-sufficiency. Afghan people love to work. We are not the type of people who are going to want to rely on benefits for too long. Every single person that especially the men that I've bumped into on the base have said, when can I work? How can I work? They even want to work on the base. So we've got them volunteering, right? They just want to get their hand, they want to roll up their sleeves and get to it. So self-sufficiency, and it comes along with the pride and the honor that Afghans have, right, in their culture. They want to be self-sufficient. They want to just work and provide for their families, right? So I believe that once self-sufficiency occurs and they don't feel like they have to depend on somebody else, that's going to do a lot for their mental health, especially for men, right? Cultural integration, right now we're segregated on the basis, but we started to do some events where we have like side to side men and women, right? Side to side. Slowly but surely, we can't do it overnight, but slowly but surely, we want to teach cultural integration. It's okay that men and women are in the same room here in the United States because it doesn't have the same connotation that it had in Afghanistan, right? We spoke about spiritual wellness, right? We talked about the masjids and keeping connected to the place of, or whatever worship that the people have, to keep connected to that. Emotional wellness, right? So yeah, absolutely, there's a taboo, not only for Afghans, but overall, most cultures, including here in the United States, right? We have a lot of taboo when it comes, and a lot of stigma attached to emotional wellness and mental health disorders and mental health issues. If you start to tell an Afghan, that I think you might have a mental health disorder, they're going to get very offended and insulted, and they're going to tune you out. So you really, really want to make sure that when you are dealing with this population, that you keep in mind that those taboos do exist. They do exist, and they do affect the way people are going to function. Now, I will tell you this: the good news about these taboos and these stigmas attached are a lot of the conversations that I've been having are people are starting to realize that, you know what, I think I have an issue. I spoke to a lot of people who told me this. I think being in war has really affected me here. This is the kind of way they've been talking to me about it. And I'm like, okay, talk to me about it. What do you mean? How do you feel? Right? So there are different ways that we want to approach it. We don't want to just go out on a limb and say, hey, I'm diagnosing you with bipolar disorder, right? We want to kind of say, look, I know you're suffering. I can't imagine what you went through. I don't think that I would be sane if I lived in an environment and war for 40 years, right? So it's okay to feel this way. Really validating people's feelings is going to be very key, very important. And bringing back hope, right? Telling people, hey, because a lot of people say in Afghanistan, I had a 6-bedroom home, and what's going to happen to me here? I heard they're going to put me in a 2-bedroom. Yeah, they probably will. But you know what? In a year or 2 years or 3 years, slowly but surely, I want you to come. Let's go visit some successful Afghan Americans out there. Let's visit them. Let's ask them, right? My father started off in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, right? And then by the time he was in his 20s, by the time I was in kindergarten, he had purchased his first home. And he was a very successful entrepreneur in the community. And people would come to him for financial mentorship, right? So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's important to use people from the community. So I wanted to include a refugee case study here. This is from the past, just to kind of put things into perspective. Dealing with this population, I have dealt with a lot of domestic violence issues, and this refugee case study was based on an Afghan refugee who was a victim, or I should say the survivor of a severe domestic violence issue, right? This particular individual, I personally dealt with her. She was young. She reported severe, meaning that she had experienced everything: physical, sexual, emotional, and financial form of abuse. Okay. So she started coming to me and for sessions. And one Tuesday she came in with a black eye. And I looked at her, and I had my notes in front of me, and I got really quiet. And she said, Freshta, why are you so quiet? I said, week after week, you come to me and you share very, very traumatic stories with me. And today you walked in with a black eye. How do you think I'm going to feel, right? Every single week you come to me and you're this young girl, you have no family. She was very young, and you're being severely abused by this person. this doesn't sit well with me. We have to get you some help, right? So in the beginning, she was like, no, he's threatening to kill my family back home. And, typical power and control wheel, typical behavior. And she was hospitalized quite a few times. And in the beginning, it was getting really hard to just really get through to her. But that day, I showed some really, really tough love. And that was a game changer. I said to her, I cannot see you week after week with this black eye. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I could see you anymore. And she just looked at me. She said, what do you mean? I said, you've become attached to me. And we've come to this point where you're coming to me to vent, not to get a solution, right? And I know it's very, very difficult to get out of a situation like this, but I want you to call me when you're ready. I don't care what time it is. I want you to call me when you're really ready to get out of this, right? So for several weeks, we went through this. And after this conversation, believe it or not, I think it was less than a week later. It was it was a Tuesday night. I don't know why I remember specifically, it was a Tuesday night. 10 o'clock at night, I get a phone call on my cell phone. And I did safety planning with her that same day. I said, if you decide the next time that this happens, this is what you're going to do. We came up with the safety plan. I told her what to do. I gave her the safety phone. I told her to sew it into her pillow. She called me at 10 o'clock at night. She was crying. And she said, now what? And I said, where are you? What happened? And she's crying. She said, you told me to leave and that you were going to help me. I said, yeah, I did tell you that the moment, what happened. So he beat her to a bloody pulp. She grabbed the book bag and left. And she called me, and then we called 911. We got our caseworker on site. And guess what? She was really mad at me in the beginning because they sent her to, a shelter. She was really mad at me in the beginning, and I was communicating with her. She said, you told me that you told me that I was going to go to a shelter, but you didn't even come to visit me. I found out that that her spouse had kind of knew my name and figured it. So for safety reasons, I also have to protect myself. I had somebody else go in to visit her. Guess what? She went through this difficult time. She relocated out of the state. She's in college now. She's divorced and she's working. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There was a very, very difficult period of her life, right? But this is how we did it. We had the safety plan. We had all the stuff ready. We worked together. She's in school. She's working, and she really, really, this was the type of person when day one, when I met her, I was really skeptical about whether or not, we were going to get anywhere with this. So I wanted to share that experience with you so that you can get a good picture of how things work. Okay, protective factors. I know that I'm kind of running out of my own time, not your time, but my time. So I think that we talked about a lot of the protective factors with regards to strengthening families. And I did have a video. Unfortunately, I'm not going to really have any time to go through that video because I really wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the challenges on the base, right? The challenges on the base are really important to know and understand. The last two in particular. We have an amazing individual on this call, Dr. Rosalind Rogers, and she is heading this group that was created, that was requested to be created by Harris Tareen. And basically what we've done is under her leadership, we've created a list of mental health providers throughout the nation that are of Afghan American descent. And we've been having some phone calls from the bases to be able to jump in and help out. But we don't actually have staff on the bases. And I don't want to get into the challenge of the red tape. There's red tape. It's hard to get on the base. But I can give you an example, two already that I've dealt with. One, I had an individual that was getting off the plane. And when he was getting off the plane, he was a mental health. He has some type of mental health disorder. I don't know what the mental health disorder is, neither does his father. But when he was getting on the plane, his pills slipped out of his pocket. So about a month into this crisis, I get a phone call from Colonel. Colonel tells me, I need your help. I said, okay, is there any mental health providers out there? No. I couldn't get there because I do live a couple of hours away from the base, but he said, let's FaceTime. So we got on FaceTime. I said, what's going on? This particular individual has been off his medication for a month. Can you diagnose him? I said, absolutely not. We cannot diagnose somebody in one sitting, right? So the problem is the military doesn't have this training, and they're doing whatever, they're going above and beyond to try to help. But the problem is that there's this disconnect because there's no providers. So I coached him on how to get this guy admitted. He entered somebody's room and he refused to leave. He lifted up his shirt and he kept saying, my stomach hurts. And he was saying, my stomach hurts over and over again. So we got him alone. I asked Colonel to evacuate the room, make sure nobody else was there except for his father. His father said he has violent outbursts and that he witnessed his mother being killed by a missile in front of him. And ever since then, quote unquote, and translate directly what he said, quote unquote, after that, he lost his mind. I said, okay, can you give me some symptoms? Can you give me medication? Zilch. I couldn't get much from the father. Father said, I don't know. These things happen. He saw something. He's in shock. He just kept referring to the condition as shock, right? So this situation was about 3 hours until we finally convinced him to get on the EMT. He was admitted into, they didn't even know what the nearest psychiatric facility was for admission. And the week before, he was just admitted to the ER. So there's that disconnect, right? The disconnect is first of all, how can we get all these people to know and understand the process? Now Colonel knows on this base, right? So now he knows that there's a process. But B, there was this disconnect the first time he was sent because they don't know that sending an individual with mental health disorder in the emergency room is going to do nothing. They're going to take his blood, exactly what they did, and they sent him back saying, you're fine, right? So these people have to be admitted into the right facilities. So now we kind of have a system going a little bit, and we're just going to work from there. And hopefully we're going to get some staff on to help. There was another situation where this happened just last night, right? Without getting into details, there was an individual that was making advances toward another individual, and the girl was very, very traumatized. And he just wanted me to talk to her about the trauma. So I got on the phone, we FaceTime, and we just spoke about her experience and the trauma. And, and these are just two individuals, right? So we're working very hard to get mental health professionals to do some really, really critical needs assessments, right? Trying to get them to get on there, do these needs assessments, try to figure out what is the need and how can we meet that need? So that's where this is where the disconnect is right now, okay? We need culturally competent people to understand the cultural nuances and taboos, to understand the stigmas, to understand how to deal with people that have PTSD in Afghanistan. And the last thing that I will say before we get into Q&A, because I know I'm already 5 minutes over my Q&A time, is our goal is to be toward transformation. We want to train organizations and schools and masajes on how to deal with this type of trauma-informed care. We at Cornerstone are trying to come up with as many, and we already have existing ones, thank God, online programs and curricula that offer education materials. I was just talking about to Glencora about how we're trying to get all these things translated into Dari and into Pashto as quickly as we can. And we anticipate this is going to be a great need. We've got some resources here. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, a great one, CORE. I've got the Cornerstone up here as well, the website and all the information. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I know I only have 25 minutes left. I apologize for going over, but I would like to get into some Q&A yes.
Sure, Freshta, thank you so much, and no apologies. I was really engaged with a lot of the stories and anecdotes you told of your time working with this population. Really quickly, before we turn it over to some of the questions, everyone, please remember you can use the Q&A function box on Zoom to enter your questions. I'll facilitate them there. And then also for those who are interested, I am putting the links in for the evaluation certificate. And if you'd like to join my listserv and be updated on future training opportunities, I've put that in there as well. All right, let's see here. So the first question I have is a little bit of a technical one, and somebody's saying they had been told that parolees, while not typically eligible for benefits, are being given benefits in Virginia via state funds. Can you determine the accuracy or inaccuracy of that for us?
Right. So basically, what's happening right now, nobody is getting anything because everybody's on the base, right? So we haven't really gotten to the point where we're not even at that point yet. We're still in, remember when I talked a little bit in the beginning of the presentation, we were right at stage one. We're still pretty much in stage one. There's very, very few families that have been resettled. Those ones that are resettled probably left the base, which is what we're encouraging people not to do. So we've had to work backwards with a lot of these folks. And we're just tapping into the resources and the organizations out there. So maybe that's where the benefit part is confusing. Like, I'll give you an example. Somebody left the base and was here in Newark, right? It was in New Jersey. And what ended up happening was, because they had 4 children, somebody misinformed them and told them to get off the base because they were going to have help. Well, they ended up here in an Airbnb, completely stranded with no help. So 3 organizations got together, one tried to get housing, one tried to get, certain essentials that were needed. So we're not there. We're trying to get the government to both federal and on a state level to create this funding bucket and to pass the legislation to have specifically funds for the parolees, because it gets very complicated when immigration statuses come in resettlement. Yeah. Glencora,
Thanks,
you're remote.
Freshta. It's always hard to remember to unmute yourself. Yes, I have another question here from Ken, and shout out to Ken because he was the origin of the idea for this presentation. So grateful to Ken for that. And he asks, how can we get culturally competent mental health professionals to a more remote location like Fort Pickett? Mm-hmm. And yet he's trying to engage volunteers in Northern Virginia.
That's a beautiful question. So Ken, I believe Rosalind is still on this call. I would strongly urge for you to connect with her because she is leading that entire initiative, and she will definitely help you to get culturally competent folks to Fort Pickett. We have them, and we're happy to facilitate that. So, and if she's not on here, yeah, there she is. There we go.
I even just unmuted her. She has a plug to put in.
Go ahead.
I gave her permission to speak. I don't know
Please.
if she's put her name and her email address into the chat for those who would like to look at that.
Sorry, I think I might have pressed the wrong button. I apologize for that.
Thanks, Rosalind. All right, let's see here. This is probably one that a lot of people are thinking. And that's how can mental health providers or professionals, how can they provide support now? What can you do now if you're in a CSB or, another behavioral health clinic? What can they do now to help mitigate or potentially prepare for serving this population?
That's a great question. So I would definitely some of the stuff I mentioned in the slides as far as the support groups, I would start preparing as soon as possible, but I would also reach out to the major resettlement agencies that are going to be resettling these folks and create partnerships. I'll give you an example. Cornerstone has a partnership. The biggest partnership we have is with the International Rescue Committee, right? So we actually have a room in the IRC out here in New York and New Jersey where we see our clients in that particular room. This is pre-COVID, right? So now we have virtual platforms where we're able to, but that would not have happened unless we came up with some formal partnerships. Partner up with these big Lutheran social services, Catholic charities, create very formal partnerships with them. And I'm telling you that their doors are wide open and they're willing to do that so that we can get these programs up and running as soon as possible.
Thanks, Freshta. I know that a lot of us will have to look into that, is partnerships with these organizations. And perhaps in the follow-up email, you can give me a few suggestions of organizations that would be good for these behavioral health care providers to reach out to. In addition, somebody's asking if they could also get the list of qualified clinicians. So if you would share that as well, I can put that as a follow-up resource as well. And then we have somebody here asking about Fort Lee, and that they are a Farsi speaker, and that they would love to volunteer. So I don't know if I can connect you to them as well.
Yeah, yes, I mean, please connect with Rosalind, because we would love to add you to that list. The more we have, the better.
Fantastic. All right, here's another question saying, has anyone addressed the issues of the 90 days of housing assistance not being nearly good enough?
So essentially, yes. So from an advocacy and a policy point of view, we are talking to our state legislators and our congressmen and a federal level. We have been discussing these challenges, and we have been talking about rental assistance and how resettlement agencies are working to see if we can get extensions, if we can get additional funding. We have been working, part of my 20 hours a day has been working on those types of solutions. So yes, we are trying very hard. You are right, 90 days and 3 months is not enough time. But there are other ways of, even when you're in that situation, there are other programs like emergency rental assistance that exist, right? So let's say your 90 days have expired. Every state has emergency rental assistance. Then there's another step, right? Okay, we passed our 90 days. We're not able to do this. What's the next step? So there are other government programs, but we need more funding to be able to have longer running ones. And we are working on that. Thank you for your concern.
Thanks, Freshta. Everyone who is looking to connect with Rosalind, she put her email here in the chat. I'm just going to copy and paste it back in there. I'm glad that there are already people that are excited to help. And I will also put that in the follow-up email. And if there are people, so I'm actually seeing a lot of these questions are people just offering help and wanting to volunteer or provide services in some way. We have people looking for a list of organizations on this webinar who could help render services to this population of people, probably so they can start building those connections. So I said I'll put that in the follow-up email. We'll put the list of providers who serve this population. Sorry, I'm taking notes while I'm doing this, so I don't forget. And we'll also put Rosalind's contact just in case. And let's see what else I have here. Somebody wants to know in more detail, what do you do to get access to the military bases or get access to military people on bases? I don't know if I don't know if they want access to the people in the military or the refugees in the military, but why don't you give us a little follow-up on that?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, and this is the most difficult thing, and this is what's frustrating people. But please know and understand that the reason why it is so hard to get on the base is for the safety and security of you and the folks on the base, right? In the beginning, they weren't allowing any volunteers at all because they wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be a COVID outbreak, right? We had to make sure first that everybody was COVID swabbed and everybody, was in the best health. Now it's safety and security. Unfortunately, some volunteers were abusing some of their privileges, and that led to some problems. I can tell you at Fort Dix, we were allowed to have 500 volunteers. Now we're down to only 150. It is extremely difficult to get on the base. You have to have if you are part of an NGO, for example, the NGO will sponsor you. They give you what's called a sponsorship. There's a form you fill out. Then there's a background search that's done. And then when you get on the base, there's another background search that takes about 45 minutes. When you're actually there, you have to go through that search again. So there's one that they do before you're on base, and there's one that they do at the visitor center once you're at the base. They take your picture, they run your social, they do an extensive check. They take your picture, they give you a badge, and they allow you to go in. But once you're in, you are escorted by military officials past the gate and to every point in which. This is like not somewhere where you can just freely roam. And I think what was happening was some of the volunteers, I mean, they met well, but maybe they were bringing some donations for people they felt bad for, or maybe they were bringing in, maybe taking some pictures, which is not allowed, or videos. So some things were happening. So we went from 500 to now 150. So now it's even more difficult to get on the base, right? So again, I would recommend that you go through whatever organization you're working for and to connect and partner with an NGO on base, right? So for example, I partner with the IRC, so through that channel, I was able to start this process. It turned into something completely different. We went from interpreter to mental health provider to community liaison to a lot of fun and not so fun things, and that's okay because we're in crisis mode, so we have to wear many, many hats. So that's kind of like what that's at. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for giving us that overview. So I know that a lot of people here are eager to help or volunteer, but that should give people a little bit of an idea of kind of some of the challenges of getting onto the military base, and that might not be the best place to intervene for some of these people because of those barriers. But nonetheless, if you think you have skills and qualifications, it might be worth it to reach out to the right people. Yes, and Rosalind is saying here in the chat, anyone who is Afghan American or would like to connect to American Afghan mental health professionals, email her and she can connect to you. And she looks forward to hearing from you. And so I guess that's going to lead me to my next question of how long do we expect the Afghan guests to be in the military facilities? When do we anticipate that they might be entering the community so that, if there is a timeline, I know things in the government don't always go according to plan.
Right. So there is not a specific number of months or weeks that we can disclose. But what I can say is that they do not want people to remain on the base, meaning that they want to get people processed and off the base as soon as possible. So as soon as possible could be 2 weeks to 2 months. We don't know. We really can't narrow it down because there's so many elements to it, especially the housing and especially the screenings that are happening and newer people are still coming. I have to make that clear. People are still coming. So I cannot give a specific number, but I do know that DHS has said that they would like to finish this as soon as possible, this part of the operation. And also it's important to understand that, while they're on the base, everybody is doing whatever they can to accommodate them. There's always going to be things that fall through the cracks, but for the most part, the military has been amazing, and the service and the NGOs. And when you walk around, you just see a lot of acts of mercy. So it's important to really highlight that.
Yes, I remember you mentioning that there's going to be close to, whether they stay all in Virginia is one thing, but close to 15,000 people who will be entering the US through one of the Virginia military bases. Do you know, and this is my own question, what are what Afghan sort of communities they might be connected to in the Virginia area, or where are the locations they might be most likely to resettle in the state of Virginia?
I do not know the answer to that. I'm going to be honest. I do not know the answer to that. And because right now is the phase of logistics. And again, the number one key to all of this is going to be housing. So I anticipate that this will be areas that are going to be a little bit further away, like perhaps closer to Richmond, closer to Roanoke, closer areas that are not going to be as urbanized or as closer to DC. Or I anticipate that it's going to be closer to the forts.
Yeah, and where are there existing Afghan communities in Virginia that that we might be able to help connect them to, or point them in the direction of?
Sure, Woodbridge, Sterling, Herndon, Fairfax, Manassas, all these areas are very heavily Afghan populated.
Yeah, Yasaman said here in Henrico too as well. And then I know that some will be coming in through Henrico and Richmond City.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to switch a little bit here. Our next question that I have here is, do you have any suggestions for managing emotional involvement when working with clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really important, right? This goes back to what I was talking about in the middle to last month, right? So when you realize, or when you get to the point that you feel like you're now unable to function, right? It's very hard because we're human at the end of the day, and we're dealing with other humans who are suffering immensely. So, your eyes may well up, right? Like the individual was telling me about his son. We sat down, my eyes welled up. I mean, I didn't sit there and hysterically cry, but my eyes welled up, and he knew that I was tearful, right? And there's really no way as a human to prevent certain feelings from coming out. But I did keep, your body gestures and your body language say a lot to people. It's really important to, for example, keep, if you can, your demeanor as much as you can in one way. Like, so if I'm looking at you, in this way, I could just kind of keep this demeanor. As far as your emotions, I would say that if you have this experience and you feel like you get too emotional and that prevents you and maybe makes the other person feel uncomfortable or maybe even feel worse, I don't know, then perhaps it would be better to put yourself in a different part of this operation, right? So there's so many elements of this. You don't necessarily have to just deal with the mental health portion, right? You can be dealing with, like, let's get donations together. I know people that I really care about, they're sensitive. They're like, Freshta, I can't see these people. It breaks my heart. Can I just collect donations? And I'm like, this is huge, to run a donation drive or to collect people together to get all these items. That's a very stressful job within itself. And it's very, very needed. I think it's important that when it comes to emotional awareness and wellness, that that's why I was saying that it's important to stick to the area of expertise. So if you're a mental health professional, you've gone through the training, so you kind of know where your professional boundaries are, and when you're starting to get into secondary trauma and when you need to walk away, right? If you don't have that training, it's really hard for me to tell you in 2 or 3 minutes how to keep that professional from personal boundary from crossing, right? So I would highly recommend that people in those areas, because they're trained to deal with those types of issues.
Thanks, Freshta. Another questions I have here is probably something that a lot of people on this training are wondering, is that when refugees are assimilated into a community, part of the plan is to set them up with community, it's part of the plan also to set them up with community mental health treatment services. I understand that basic needs are the priority, but I was wondering if CSBs in Virginia are provided with this training. And I'll answer the second part is, I don't think CSBs are provided with this training, but it is going to be recorded and on DBHDS's YouTube. So if you, and I'll share that link with you all, if you feel that it would be helpful to people in your CSB, please share it. But I'll let Freshta answer the other part about, after integrating them in the community, is there any sort of integration into community mental health treatment services?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the uniqueness of this situation is it's never happened before, right? So being that it never happened before, we're in the process of planting all these seeds. So when people ask me, why did you leave your job? What are you doing? I tell them I'm just planting seeds in different places and hoping that by the time people are ready to be resettled and in these agencies, we have programs going, right? So really right now we're in a planning phase, and we are offering our services, and we're trying to get as many service providers together under these different groups. And I run the New Jersey Coalition for Afghan Refugees. In New Jersey in particular, for example, we have all of these folks who have these levels of understanding. And we're partnering them up and linking them up to these resettlement agencies, so that by the time people are in this situation, we can go ahead and make sure they're receiving these services. on an individual level, I'm in Virginia every 2 to 3 months because I do have a great partnership with you guys. I will also be there personally to help and guide and facilitate whatever is needed in this very important time, along with Dr. Eva Stitt and our amazing team. Very happy to connect and go ahead and continue doing as many trainings are possible, recording as many of them, and trying to get them to the right people so that people can have the services that are required for them.
Thank you, Freshta. I know you're probably not monitoring the chat, but there's lots of people in the chat who are thanking you for sharing this information, sharing this training, saying it was incredible. And I know now you have a coalition of people that are eager to support you. So please feel free to reach out when you think there is a need to start connecting refugees, really from any country to these services. Please start reaching out. One last reminder, I'm going to put into the chat an evaluation link. Please evaluate this presentation. It's very important. A certificate, if you would like to receive a certificate for contact hours, and then also the listserv to be in communication with me. If you are not receiving my emails and you signed up, check your promotions or your junk tab. It does come through constant contact. So you might want to check there as well. And yeah, I'm going to put one more question for you, Freshta, because I think it's a really important one and something I know that you're passionate about. And we have our last 2 minutes here. And that is there supports for language barriers, cultural respects are necessary? Is there a cheat sheet? Is what this person is asking.
So as far as support for language barriers, so here's I didn't emphasize too much because I've done a lot of workshops on language access, so I didn't talk too much about that. But I will tell you that language access is going to be at the top of the list for these folks. And people will be afraid to speak up and say, I don't speak the language. I don't, and this is where the miss is, right? We need to get these service providers with as many language lines and trained interpreters. And please do reach out to Dr. Eva Stitt if you're looking for trained interpretation services. We will set up a training. We will get these people trained and qualified. We need as many Dari and Pashto interpreters and translators as possible at this time. It is so incredibly important to have the language lines with these two languages so that if there's not an in-person interpreter, the language line will be able to provide that. So important. If you guys need anything translated, reach out. I put my email address into the chat box. We can try to get that translated. If not through Glencore, we could do it through my agency. We can do it through other community members. But yeah, absolutely, so incredibly important to overcome that barrier. If we have that barrier constantly, it's going to be hard. And let me tell you, one language, I know we're going a little over time, one mistaken language has made the difference between a pregnant woman used an idiom and her interpreter was using the wrong dialect of Spanish. She said something like, I'm so hungry I could kill, or something like that. And she rubbed her stomach and she was pregnant. And that was misinterpreted to say that I'm going to kill my baby. Well, this woman ended up in a psych center detention ward because somebody misinterpreted what she said. So yes, it is my passion, and language is very, very important to me, along with behavioral health. So I do highly encourage that you can get your organizations to get some real good trained and qualified interpreters. That would be amazing. And reach out to us. We can help you with that.
Fantastic, Freshta. I am adding that to the list of things I'm going to follow up with in terms of my resources with the organizations, the list of providers, Rosalind's contact, Freshta's contact, as well as an opportunity for anybody who would like to be trained in behavioral health interpretation. We have a curriculum in the state of Virginia, and we offer the training for free. So yes, particularly yes, for any language, this isn't specific, but that's where the need is right now. Okay, well, thank you so much, Freshta. Thank you, everyone. I'm putting one last into the chat, one last one last set of links. I know sometimes they get lost in the chat to the evaluation, the certificate, and the listserv. Thank you all so much for coming. Freshta, we're so grateful to have you here. We know you are burning the candle from both ends with the work that you are doing, working really long days. So we're grateful you took some time out to come speak to us today. And we hope that we can partner with you again in the future, and that you take some of your own advice and take some time to do some self-care for yourself. So thanks so
Absolutely.
much, everyone. Have a great afternoon, great evening.
Thank you so much, Glencore. Thank you, everybody out there. I just want to say one last thing before we get off, and that's check on your Afghan American friends and community members. They're going through a lot. Offer some support, offer to send a meal, offer to take care of their kids. We are drowning in a lot. And I want to thank everybody on this call. And I also want to thank especially the Afghan American counterparts that are working day in and day out round the clock, trying to get a lot of really, really important things done. Thank you again. And please do reach out. You have my email address. Have a good day.